Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here, ready to bring to you all another exciting video covering the history of wrestling games. At the dawn of the 2000s, gaming and wrestling had a lot in common. Both entertainment mediums were mainstream and hugely popular, and both fields were constantly trying to entertain their audiences via pushing boundaries and defying limitations. While on the whole much of this was amazing, there was still regularly moments that would have us all face-palming, such as the time sexual chocolate Mark Henry impregnated the elderly Mae Young, causing her to give birth to a hand, or that time they started releasing 3D Sonic games, known as the Adventure series, that no one cared about on the Dreamcast. As you will remember, moments like this were either hated or sarcastically laughed at by long-term fans. But total bollocks like this would lead to the birth of both gamers and wrestling fans alike beginning to lean further into nostalgia than ever before. Players were beginning to re-pick up their NES's and Master System joypads for the first time in a while, to get away from the mostly boring polygon nonsense that the mainstream were trying to shovel down our throats at the time. People were beginning to remember and reminisce about how great the 1980s truly were, and when games delivered fun, pick up and play experiences. Not only that, but back then wrestling offered a simply wholesome family experience too, rather than vulgar car crash television inspired by the success of Jerry Springer. Content that some fans were getting little enjoyment from. Now, bringing into the equation what an awful year 2001 was, it is no surprise that many of us were craving better and more simple times. Thankfully, at the tail end of that year, a brand new video game would be released that celebrated wrestling's fantastic past, allowing gamers to play as many of their favourites of old. Today we are going to look at the game that proclaimed the Mania was about to begin all over again. This shall include looking at the history of the title that starred Hulk Hogan and company on the PlayStation 2 for the first time, and analysing how it handled and how it is thought of today. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Legends of Wrestling. Yeah! In my lifetime thus far, the world of professional wrestling has gone through two boom periods that attracted more attention than ever before. The first of these occurred in the mid to late 1980s, when Vince McMahon's WWF became the first company to have their show broadcast nationwide via cable television, which would lead to both the end of the old school territory system and the birth of super shows like Wrestlemania that mixed pop culture icons with the WWF's homegrown talent, or in some cases, stolen. This era would peak in popularity in 1987 at Wrestlemania 3 when Hulk Hogan body slammed Andre the Giant, a moment that remains iconic to this day. While wrestling remained hugely popular past this point, the WWF product slowly declined in popularity, and at one point rival promotion WCW would even surpass them in the ratings. This desperation would result in the company going into fight or flight mode, and as you will be aware, the WWF chose to fight, leading to the second huge boom period of our lives in the late 90s through to the dawn of the millennium. The promotion would successfully capture the zeitgeist of the era, managing to put out a product that was in tune with everything that was popular at the time. You could place the brand side by side with South Park and Jerry Springer, and the show would not look out of place. This would result in attracting new fans to wrestling who had never been interested before, as it was so different to how wrestling had been presented traditionally. The wrestling audience was now as large as ever before, but there were still fans who had been watching wrestling forever who yearned for the presentation of old. This is where the release of Legend of Wrestling in December 2001 was a genius move. The game would appear to be an exciting proposition for wrestling fans both old and new alike, because for old school fans they would get to play as their old favourites, reimagined with PlayStation 2 graphics for the first time, whereas younger wrestling fans would be interested in the prospect of a modern game that would allow them to live wrestling's past too. To top it off, the cover star of the game was Hulk Bloody Hogan, an icon every wrestling fan was familiar with. If you had not grown up watching him in the 80s in WWF, you would be more than aware of his work in WCW in the 90s anyway. He was a superstar. In fact, if you had have purchased this game in PAL regions at launch, like myself, The fact that this game starred Hogan had even greater significance, as the game released in May 2002, a period where Hulk Hogan had his first reign as WWF Champion in 9 years. It seemed like the WWF was smart enough too during this time frame to lean into this nostalgia craving, as seeing the Hulkster win the belt that year would bring great satisfaction for those disenfranchised with modern wrestling. Holding the belt at 49 years old and starring in a brand new video game, Hulkamania clearly still ruled. So while a huge demand for old school wrestling clearly existed in 2001 and 2, the game itself was interestingly simply born out of Acclaim successfully managing to make the best out of a bad situation. For many years Acclaim had been the WWF's sole video game publisher. However, after the WCW games surpassed the WWF games in quality and sales, the World Wrestling Federation would drop Acclaim like a ton of bricks. Now, bringing into account how lucrative and popular wrestling games were at the time, this would lead to Acclaim becoming the publisher for video games featuring the United States third tier promotion, ECW, leading to 2 games known as Hardcore Revolution and Anarchy Rules. After suffering through financial issues, ECW closed its doors in early 2001. The WWF would purchase the promotion. Acclaim no longer held the licenses for any wrestling games, which would obviously lead to Legends of Wrestling being born, a video game built around the industry's biggest stars over the last few decades, rather than one specific promotion. Legends of Wrestling would be a game that allowed players to grapple with 42 of the greatest who ever ruled the ring, offering a number of match types, play modes and arenas to add to the overall appeal of the game. So let us attempt to run through everything this first of a kind game has to offer. Upon starting the playthrough and reaching the game's main menu, gamers will be presented with a number of options. If players opt to choose Exhibition mode, gamers can compete in multiple match types against their chosen foes. These include regular one-on-one matches, vicious three-way dances, near riot free-for-all four-way dances and tag team matches players. Now, if you were a wrestling game connoisseur at the time, you would have instantly noticed that this selection of match types was severely limited in comparison to what modern WWF games could offer at the time. But at the very least, this fit the old school territory feel of the game. Now, in terms of wrestling mechanics themselves, the game boasted what it called the revolutionary start position system that could allow gamers to link moves together for lethal single button combinations and superior gaming. Beyond this marketing guff, what this entails in reality is that in Legends of Wrestling, it has a simple grappling system. Basically, when grappling with an opponent and executing a tie-up, players can press any of the 4 different PlayStation-shaped buttons to execute different moves. Not hitting one of these buttons allows wrestlers to instead perform their own default moves. Moves are also different depending on if you tie up from in front or behind an opponent, leading to greater move variety. This system is nothing special, but it is simple and usable enough. Like in traditional fighting games, wrestlers in this one can also strike at 3 possible strength levels, allowing for weak, medium and strong strikes depending on button combinations. There are also behind attacks, bent over attacks, and behind bent over attacks, allowing for more ways to gain the advantage. Action can be taken outside the ring and high spots are also performable, while outside wrestlers can also locate weapons from under the ring to smash over their opponent's skulls. No matter which match type players opt for, each wrestler has a health meter that dwindles as they take damage, which of course makes them easier to pin as a result. There is also a combo and reversal meter located here, where if players hit the button commands at the right time presented, combos and reversals can be successfully executed. There is also a finisher meter located up here that gradually fills up, and when this meter is full and flashing, and an opponent is in the right position, wrestlers can perform finishing moves utilising the right analog stick. Gameplay, however, is mixed up slightly further within this game's career mode. In this mode, players guide a solo wrestler through an entire season worth of matches, trying to win coveted championships. After selecting a wrestler in this mode, gamers must then choose a region where to begin their career, echoing back to the old school territory system once more. The goal of this mode is to conquer each territory by winning their gold. There is some very basic storylines here too, but most of the action is in the ring. Speaking of in-ring action, in order to get the title shots in the first place in each region, your chosen wrestler must be able to increase their popularity, This is achieved by executing in-match feats and achieving victories. Every match in campaign mode features an additional match excitement feature, which fills up when players perform certain moves, use weapons in combat, and other shenanigans such as ref bumps for example that excite the crowd. After a match is finished, the excitement meter percentage will be added to your popularity meter, which must be completely filled in order to progress. You can lose popularity though too, for example using the same move too many times in one match, which is a nice touch of realism which I cannot recall being present in any wrestling games before this. There is also a tournament mode where wrestlers compete in short round robin style contests, where combatants fight it out until they are eliminated from the competition. But that's about all this King of the Ring style mode presents. A fair amount of time and development energy seems to have been pumped into this game's Create a Legend mode, resulting in an acceptable amount of customization when building your own grappler. This mode allows you to pick your wrestler's gender, along with their body type and cosmetic appearance, including facial features, ring attire and entrance gear, which you can then follow up with choosing your character's name, entrance music, manager, moveset and other attributes. By today's standards, this mode is pretty rudimentary, and most of the features that are on offer are available in other wrestling games, but Legends of Wrestling still offers enough customization to have fun with. For example, I made a wrestling legend of the modern era, Richard Parliament, who I had live out his dream of jobbing to an elderly Hulk Hogan in a gymnasium. You see, despite this game's limitations, anything is still possible. One further reason to keep coming back to this game is that it offers a range of unlockable characters who the game informs you how to unlock on the wrestler select screen. Achieving said in-game feats associated with hidden fighters allows players to add more characters to the playable lineup. Speaking of wrestlers present in this game, I guess they are the main appeals and attractions that this game offered back in the day. As mentioned, Hogan is clearly the biggest star of them all, however there are of course many other huge draws present too, with standouts such as Bret the Hitman Hart, Ted DiBiase and the Legion of Doom. The game has a selection of all-time greats from the WWF, NWA, WCW, WCCW, AWA, ECW and various independent promotions from across the United States. In regards to all of these wrestlers, I do not know about you, but when I first played this game, I felt the former ECW roster members were massively out of place here. I certainly did not look at wrestlers like Rob Van Dam or Sabu as legends, since they had mostly only ever wrestled down in the third tier of American wrestling, a show that was so bad at the time they could not get a new TV deal and it was taken off air. Pair this with the fact that these gentlemen were relatively young, they just seemed out of place to me. Although I will admit that despite all of this, I was still somewhat happy with their presence, especially when we take into account that Rob Van Dam had a fantastic year in the WWF in 2001, but he was very much being positioned as the future of wrestling at the time, rather than a legend of the past. So I did find this a tad bit irking, but it was nice to be able to play as him when he was not present in the WWF games released that year. So that is everything the game had to offer in a nutshell. But what did game journalists make of the return of the golden era of wrestling? Let's find out. GameSpot stated Legends of Wrestling is definitely a new direction for modern wrestling game, in that it includes the classic wrestlers of the past. Fans of wrestling history and wrestling's present will be pleased to find Hulk Hogan's leg drop and big boot, as well as Rob Van Dam's 5-star frog splash and Van Daminator. While the idea of playing as these wrestling legends is an appealing one, Legends of Wrestling sadly doesn't follow through with an equally competent game. Legend of Wrestling captures the grappling greats at the peak of their careers, and in order to best convey this, Acclaim decided to use a heavily exaggerated muscle-bound graphical style for the wrestlers. Their appearance is very much like that of thick plastic action figures, which when combined with the generally mediocre animations, fails to impress. A bit more effort could have easily been made to truly capitalise on the excellent premise behind Legends of Wrestling. Some of the interesting features that were originally slated to appear in Legends of Wrestling never made it in. Barbed wire matches and scaffold matches are nowhere to be found, and there is no commentary to speak of. Perhaps most disappointing to wrestling fans will be Legends of Wrestling's poor control. There is a noticeable delay between the press of a button and the reaction on screen. Fans of wrestling will be pleased with the direction that Acclaim has taken with its newest franchise. Best of all, some of the greatest wrestlers from decades past are making their first ever appearance in a video game, and that in itself is exciting. However, the lack of match variety, the sloppy control, and the poor overall execution makes Legends of Wrestling a rental at best. IOGM would be far less harsh than GameSpot with their review. With the journalist writing, I like Legends of Wrestling. I like the overall presentation. I like the variety of wrestlers. I like the combo counter system. And to some degree, I like the graphics. Sure, it could be deeper overall, but it certainly does a lot more right than wrong in my book. The game has good presentation throughout. From the starting movie to the menus, the game is easy to get into, easy to navigate and easy on the eyes. Acclaim has employed a unique cartoony style that sets it apart from other games in this genre. It looks fun to play, it is fun to play. The graphics in Legends are grandiose and cartoony. This is a welcome change from some of the angular models we've seen in the past. The wrestlers look beefy and bold, and their movements are grand and exaggerated. I like the overall style that Acclaim is going for. I've got much love for any game with Superfly Snooker in it. Sure, it's got some graphical issues and the gameplay is not as flashy as some of its rivals, but Legends of Wrestling has that elusive fun element. It's a great multiplayer game and the career mode will keep you busy for the times in between. Reflecting back, I think both of these reviews have some pretty strong points, as this is a game that has its fair share of strengths and weaknesses. The game was released 19 years ago, which scarily is a longer gap in time than between the release of this one and Wrestlemania 3, which was only 13 years. So my perspective on this game is obviously different from the dawn of the millennium. When I first acquired this game, we were amidst the prime of the SmackDown series on the Sony devices, and we had recently experienced the high quality of WWF No Mercy of the Nintendo 64. In terms of gameplay expectations, they were at an all-time high, and personally, despite the colourful lineup of characters, I do not feel Legends of Wrestling is close to the same calibre as the titles I have just mentioned. Looking at this through a different lens, the game is leaps and bounds more fun than most of Acclaim's previous wrestling games though, including their recent ECW outings and the likes of Attitude and Warzone. For an Acclaim wrestling game, this was by far the best one yet, but still not one of the greatest wrestling games that had ever been made. Removed from the expectations of playing the next No Mercy, the game's a lot more fun today, and we can more easily forgive it for its shortcomings and enjoy the more than adequate gameplay this one allowed us to utilise when playing, as up until that point the title included the most imaginative roster in any American wrestling game. The game failed to be the next No Mercy or WWF SmackDown game, but it is still the first Legends of Wrestling game, and it was a fun enough start to the series to pick up and play and have some fun with. The gameplay was nothing groundbreaking, but the legend concept certainly was, and one nearly 20 years removed, wrestling now continuously uses as a cash cow to lean into. We have Goldberg headlining WWE and Sting headlining AEW, even though the year is 2020. Because nostalgia sells, and just like in 2001, in 2020 we are once again trying to escape the terrible year we will find ourselves in. So forget about the bloody year, boot up your PS2 and just play Legends of Wrestling again. Yeah! So ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Legends of Wrestling. Let me know in the comments down below which wrestling game you would like to see me spotlight on here next. And if you are new, why not subscribe and check out my whole wrestling game history playlist. In fact, I make multiple videos covering gaming history each week, and for those who are Sabu levels of hardcore, you can become a $5 backer on Patreon to receive even more old school gaming content. In this week's exclusive video, we looked at Project Nemo, the cancelled Hasbro console from 1989 that was set to feature Night Trap and Sewer Shark as its main exclusives. Speaking of Patreon, I would like to give shout outs to the people who fund this channel's existence. So special thank yous go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, The Murder of Crows, Heo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Razmek, Luke Samuel Denton, Ben Harradine, Corey I. Senior, Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinch, Evan Balder, Philip Manth, Cambo Rambo 82, Azra Rarakai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Angel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of Ate, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Aaron McNamara, Hermes Gonzalez, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Posty XL, Michael Hall, Wesley Sang He, Bendover, Langston Miller, New, Brian Barry, Sarah Powell, Blaming Renee, Marvin O'Liga, Chris Cool, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Jew Stewart, James McDonald, Dan Van Dammit, Adam Castin, Lewis Vion, John Bates, David Bale, Chris Fisk, Paul Elliott, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazansky, Gunther Hendricks, and everybody else who backs this channel over on Patreon. I love you all very, very much. Have a happy Christmas. Cheerio.